Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I've got to water the holy clay pots today, so I thought we'd have a quick look round the Cattleya Alliance today. I know some of those are mounted, but I've also got to water them out so I can put those in as we go past them, sort of thing. But it will be a relatively quick look because it wasn't a huge amount of time ago we went through all of these. And also, just to let you know, I'm away tomorrow at the British Orchid Congress and Show at Ridlington School. I will be filming and put some videos together sometime after that point. So there may not be a video at all tomorrow, and if I'm going to stick to tradition and have a Sunday morning chat, the chances are those won't get posted till Monday or something like that, but that's the plan as it goes at the moment. Right, let's get going then. I don't want this to be a long one. This is a pot full, 4 separate plants in here, 2 quite small and 2 of a reasonable size. This has put on a good amount of growth this year, and what's more important is it's put on a lot of roots. So this is coming on well. There are signs of the possibility of this blooming, but I've got no guarantee and I haven't had it even a year yet. So, you know, this is a relatively new acquisition. This is Cattleya Pradit spots. And I hope the spots refer to the blooms, not some of the spots I've got on the leaves. But there is only a few. I mean, I'm not particularly worried because most of the leaves that grew this year are nice and clean. It's just an odd one, like this new growth here, got a few spots. Now, I've got a feeling that could be, this may be relevant, obviously back in the heat wave, the foggers were going flat out, and with the fans on as well, there may well have been some spots of water developed as a consequence of that cool mist going on the leaves. Now, that could have had an effect, but it's a guess. It's a reasonable guess, but still a guess. Right, that's that one then. Possibility of some blooms down the line. I haven't had it long enough to know what time of year it would normally bloom, but there are signs that it might later. This is another one of the new acquisitions, and I'm well pleased with this. Both of the new growths have bloomed, and yeah, you can't really ask more than that with a new plant. It had some roots when I got it. It's grown an awful lot more this year, and it's still doing it away from that new growth point, and again over here down into the pot. So well pleased with that, and quite pleased with the blooms as well. They're an attractive combination of colours. When you get a yellow fading through orange into a pinky colour, or through peach, I would say, a peachy colour, it's a nice combination, and we've got another 3 buds to come on that. So you know, that's Little Lemon Drops, Cattleya Little Lemon Drops crossed with Cattleytonia, why not? And it's done well for me this year. I'm over the moon. Most of these Cattleyas seem to have pulled on well since the you know, planting in the holy clay pots with the large bark. They just seem to go quite well in that environment. So yeah, nice plant. This is another one of the new acquisitions. It's Cattleya harrisoniana. It's actually 2 named varieties hybridized back together, but it's still fundamentally the species, although the blooms wouldn't be true to the actual species because it's named varieties. Nonetheless, a straggly plant. It's had some troubles in a previous life, not in my time. This is my growth. This was the growth it put on, and that did actually bloom a while back. So it was a first time bloomer at that point for me. It's grown some good roots out of this new growing point, and quite honestly I'm just basically waiting for it to decide to put out a new growth, which should be coming soon, and then hopefully we can grow on another nice strong cane. The idea with this one is eventually there will be enough nice upright canes to actually take part of the back plant off, just tidy it up a bit because it hangs all over the place, this one. It's a nuisance, but anyway, it did bloom. Now, this is my Laelia anceps, and this produced a new growth not long after I got it, which then bloomed. It then produced 2 new growths which both bloomed, and this year it's produced 2 more new growths. But I'm a trifle worried that this sheath might actually abort, But the trouble is, I can't remember whether this is one of those where the sheaths form green, they start turning brown, and the spike pushes out through it later. I just can't remember. You have to excuse the scaffolding up here. This is just very loosely tied because this bulb was leaning, well, the leaf was leaning over, forming a crease. Yeah? And consequently, it was trapping the sheath. And I suspect, yes, it's tightened itself up now, so I can remove the scaffolding. It was only there as a temporary thing, just to hold that leaf upright and allow that sheath to escape. So that's worked. Jolly good. This is quite a nice plant. You know, even the older leaves on this one don't look too bad. But, yeah, as I say, I'm not sure about that sheath turning brown. We'll just have to watch it. I mean, a lot of Cattleya types do that. But I can't remember whether my anceps did that in the past. This was kept a lot cooler this year during the summer months by just going down on the floor. Still had the light it needed, but just lowered the temperature down a bit. So hopefully it's still going to bloom. Take a long time to grow the spikes because they are actually quite long. From memory, I think the spikes on mine are about 2 foot long before the buds form. So we've got quite a long wait, even if the spikes do start to push out now. Well, this is another one of the new acquisitions, and this one didn't have a good root system when I got it, so it's had to sort of recover itself and get itself some decent roots. This is this year's growth. It does have a sheath. I don't think I've ever seen a Cattleya sheath that long. I thought it was a leaf at first, but it is a unifoliate, so it shouldn't be. There's no sign of buds at the base yet. But we'll give it time, and as it's a new acquisition, again, I don't know at what point the buds will form in the sheath. I mean, on some Cattleyas, the buds are there almost immediately, and on others, you've got to wait several months before the buds even start at the base. Hsiang Yu, red pearl, red dragonfly. So that's probably going to be a red colour. That's why I got it. I'm very short on the old reds in the grow room, across the board, not just the Cattleyas. So I thought, well, if we're going to replace a few Cattleyas that were lost in the Fusarium saga a few years ago, then, well, let's get some red ones. Have done with it. But yeah, it's pushed out some good roots from this latest growth, but it's still not what I would call a good root system. It's still developing, I think, to the polite expression, but quite a tall new growth, bigger than anything else the plant's ever produced, so I'm pleased with that. So it's coming on well, and there's no reason why it shouldn't bloom, no reason at all. Well, this is one of the larger ones. I've actually had this plant a few years now. This is Young Min Orange, and this has always bloomed well for me, but it seems to go from strength to strength, because the latest two growths, if I can get here, are this one with a nice sheath on the top and the one over the other side. They are larger and far plumper than anything I've ever had before. Must be a good reason for that, I'm sure. It's probably something to do with the, possibly to do with the extra calcium this year. That's the first time that's happened for me. I mean, my fertiliser has got a sensible amount of calcium and magnesium in it, but I have actually introduced the occasional feed with pure CalMAG, which is like a boost, really. And in theory, it should push growths on stronger and better. And it's difficult to prove, but that's not a bad bit of evidence, quite honestly. So a few of the oldest leaves are going to go soon, but that's natural, don't worry about that. And the rest of the leaves are reasonable. There's still a few calcium deposits on there. That's not from the CalMAG, that's from the fogger, where I couldn't afford to use the RO water. And you know, if you put tap water in a fogger, then whatever's in the water is going to get on your plants as it blows around. But anyway, both the latest growths have got two good sheaths. The bud spikes inside are not pushing up yet, but I suspect they will soon. You can't see it now because it would need to be against the light, but this one produces a double sheath, and you can see the shadow there. So it produces a sheath, and inside is another one, and then inside of that the bud spike will form. So yeah, it's not that common to get a double sheath in Cattleyas. This one came from Chantel, who quite honestly is sorely missed. She was a major importer of plants from Thailand. They make the big nurseries out in Thailand, and mainly Cattleyas, but a good assortment of plants. But in the main, you know, Cattleya hybrids and species were her speciality. But the weather in the UK got to her, and I think the story was her other half, her husband, got a job in Australia, and she didn't even think twice at the thought of moving out to somewhere with sensible weather. So, you know, that was one of the good sellers in the UK, based in the UK, with a good import sort of record, that's now gone, you know, and there is no replacement. There is nothing to replace Chantel. So that line of those Cattleyas in the UK is now gone. I don't think she's having anything to do with orchids in Australia. I think she just totally retired from the business. But anyway, that's my memory of Chantel. That's the plant I bought from her. At the same time, I bought my Encyclia Cordigera, Digera, whatever you want to call it. I'm getting fed up with soft G's and hard G's. But anyway, those were the two I got as a sort of memory of Chantel, because she'd always been there at the shows. So that's my Young Min Orange. Now this plant I've had a while. This is just a no ID Cattleya hybrid of some description, but it does have very nice blooms, which is why I've still got it. It was quite a large plant, and it was heading off in two entirely separate directions out over the edge of the pot. So I split it into two plants, one of which went off in the 4,000 subscribers giveaway, so somebody else has got what was the best bit, in fact, and I kept the not such good bit. But it's getting going now. I mean, its latest growth does have a sheath. Hopefully it'll bloom. It always has. It's bloomed on every previous growth on this one, and it is producing some nice new roots from that new growth. That'll get a bit of oomph back into the plant, because it didn't have a very good root system for most of this year, but it has managed to produce a new growth, not as tall as the others. Yeah, so that's the giveaway sign that your plant hasn't got the strength it's once had, is that your latest growth isn't full size. And I can easily just put that down to the fact that it had a major disturbance, it was split, and it went into that pot without very good roots. But it'll replace them, and it will pull on, and I'm sure the next growth will be fine. As a consequence, this growth may not bloom, although it always has. We shall see, but that's a wait and see on that one. Now this plant has been, quite honestly, this has been recovering for well over 2 years, this poor little thing. For those of you who have followed me a long time, going back a long way, there used to be a huge mount here with that plant on it, and it was trying to grow in several points. And each time they were not progressing and roots were dying back. I declared it a fusarium plant, and discarded virtually all of it except for the strongest lead, which was then treated and planted up. And it sat there and did nothing for quite a while, and then eventually it put out this growth this year, which is not bad. It does have a sheath, but then so has every previous growth, and none of them have ever bloomed. And it still may not. It still may be too weak. But as a consequence of this new growth, and hopefully it's been treated successfully, it has now produced a reasonable root system. And we do have a nice new growth coming. So I've got hopes that this is going to be a good plant again one day. I mean, give it another couple of new growths and the back end of the plant can come off, because it's a bit tatty over here. And then we should have a good plant, providing it was successfully treated. And this is a Sophrocattleya, although it isn't, because the Sophronitis were redeclared Cattleyas in the main, so it's a Laeliocattleya. And it's Rose Pixie Pinafore. Once upon a time it was awarded. I really would like to see the blooms on this again. It's the only reason I've struggled with it for so long, is I really do like the blooms. And maybe we'll see some down the line. But it's recovering. I wouldn't say it's recovered yet, but it's on its way. And if this growth is full size and produces some more roots, then it's made it, basically. So on its way back from the brink, that one. Now this monster's on the danger list. I've had this a while now. I can't remember exactly how long, but it's at least 2 years. In fact, yeah, I think it is probably over 2 years now. And it's never bloomed, and it still isn't blooming, despite putting up 2 nice new growths this year. So you're an endangered species. If you don't put some effort into actually producing some blooms, then you're going to have to go to somebody else. It's actually Laelia purpurata, and its variety atropurpurea. So I think it's going to be purple. But it was a named variety of Laelia purpurata that I actually had on my wish list, and I never expected to get it. It's one of those I saw a pretty picture on the internet and I thought, yeah, I'll have that. And I eventually got it. And it came from Ecuagenera, which I'm always a little bit dodgy about because of their bare-rooted plants. But it did have signs of 2 new growths and some new roots growing from those new growths. So I thought, right, we'll give it a go. It wasn't too expensive. But nonetheless, you know, latest growth, not a sign, not a light. And the other one's exactly the same. It's grown good bulbs. They're all a good size. You know, it grows well and it's chucked out massive roots. But so far, no blooms. But, I might actually look that up. I mean, if Laelia purpurata is actually declared a spring or summer bloomer, then there's no point in looking for blooms at this time of year. But it certainly matures its growth in the growing season. You know, these are large leaves and large fat bulbs. So it's done its job as far as producing the growths is concerned. Now just get on and bloom, will you? Nuisance. Now this monster I got at an auction at one of the Orchid societies, as it had a broken lead on it that nobody wanted it, but it had 2 leads, so as far as I was concerned it had 1 good growing point, and for what I paid for that it was worth a go. And quite honestly, since I got it, I repotted it and cut part of the old plant off because it was a bit tatty. The older part wasn't that good. Hadn't been looked after that well, I don't think. But nonetheless, it actually had fusarium. No mucking about, definitely. So it got treated, and again, I would class that as a successful treatment simply because this growth has got pretty good leaves, a very good spike, as this is Cattleya Angel Heart, and it bloomed for me before, and it either only had 2 or 3 blooms. This time it's got 4, yeah, on that growth. And as that started to grow and was about half mature, it pushed up another one, almost straight away. And again, a good sized bulb, good leaves, and another spike. That looks like there's going to be 3 on that one. So that'll be a nice succession. I forget how long these last. But these blooms are just gorgeous. And it's a real colour changer. When it opens, the majority of the bloom is pale cream, bordering on white, with just a hint of green down the centre vein. A bright yellow in the centre of the lip and a deep purple frilly lip around the edge. But then, as it ages, the sepals and the petals get their lovely flush of, I'd say that was a lilac pink. And the little tips that match the lip darken. And it ends up as it is now, after a while of being open. And quite honestly, as Cattleya blooms go, this is pretty good stuff. And it is actually fragrant, and that smells of freesias. So that's got, hang on, that has got an almost identical fragrance to the Iwanagara apple blossom. I think if you put the 2 together you may see smell a subtle difference, but as far as I'm concerned that smells of freesias, but it's not strong. I've got to get quite close. And quite honestly, that's the first time I've smelled it. I like awful, you know, lovely bloom like this, and don't bother checking if it's fragrant, but it is. It's faint, but very, very pleasant. Anybody who knows what freesias smell like, that's gorgeous, and I didn't know that. Anyway, it's a tatty looking plant as far as the older leaves are concerned. They're not mine, but the 2 latest growths have got pretty good leaves. They both bloomed for me. And the next time it puts out a new growth, it's going to be out the side of the pot, so it's going to have to get moved. If you can see, I took a risk on planning where the new growths were going to be and effectively got it wrong. So it headed off, you know, it was already quite close to the edge of the pot. Because that's in the large Orchiata bark, I think I'm going to be able to get away with not too much disturbance on that. If I can get that to detach from the pot and give it a good shake and get the worst of the media off, and then just trim this back end, because this bulb's of no use and the leaves are going, and that's just a stump anyway, so I can take it back to there without too much effect on the plant, and then move that bit back right up against the edge of the pot, leaving it plenty of room to grow on. And I'm going to need to do that when it produces its new growth, next new growth, because it isn't at the moment. It's only just produced these two. Yeah, that's going to be the growing point. And when those roots are starting to grow, that's when I'll move it. And that is irrespective of what's going on up there. That's the point that's important. Try and keep as many of these new roots from this year as possible, because there is a mass of them going down into the pot here and out the sides. I'll lose some, but as long as I take it at the point it's going to replace its root system, it's not going to suffer too much. Wouldn't it be nice if that grew instead of just sitting there looking at me? Or this one right round the back, get another lead going. But it's obviously a vigorous grower that can produce two growths in a single season, blooming in succession like that. There's a lot of vigour in that plant, so it's a good plant, and eventually it's going to be a great plant on the grounds that these older leaves that are not mine will eventually be gone, and then, you know, we'll end up with a nice looking plant. Big, but nice, and worth the big bit just to get those blooms. I'm very well pleased with that. I think I paid 10 quid for that. That's a good £10 worth. And this is a nice sized Cattleya. This is a bit more easy to accommodate, shall we say. This has got a long name: Shinfong Little Sun Young Min Golden Boy. And this has bloomed for me before, back last February, March time. And I think it bloomed on several growths from memory in a succession, so it bloomed over quite a long period. But this year, this is the most mature growth, which does have a sheath. But if it's going to be a February, March bloomer, you know, the buds are going to be a way off. But then, to my surprise, around this side of the plant, it also pushed up these two growths. Now, these are not strong. I don't think they're going to get much taller, but they've both got a sheath. They still may bloom, despite being undersized. I don't know why, but those were surprise growths. I wasn't expecting it to do that. So they're like and there's another new one coming up there. So yeah, this seems to push out growths any time it pleases, basically. But this is the one most likely to bloom. That's this year's good sized growth. That's grown up quite nicely, and it's not a bad looking plant. Apart from this oldest pseudo bulb here, it's actually got quite a good set of leaves on it. Not a bad little plant at all. Well, medium size, I'd say. All right, these two rescue cats are still not doing very well. The only reason they still exist in my collection is the actual bloom. It's worth working towards seeing that here again. But one of them's recovering reasonably well and is putting up a strong new growth. But I'm still waiting on a new set of roots to come. And they're probably going to come from this growth as the next growth starts. I think that's the pattern on that one. This one's not doing so well. It's produced a weak new growth and there's no sign of the next growth yet. But they're both still alive, and as I say, this one looks like it's going to recover at a reasonable rate. Now it's got a good strong new growth. It'll have a nice healthy leaf. And as I said, once it produces its next new growth, a new set of roots will form here, at which point I will take it out of the pot and probably remove the back end of the plant, because it was planted like that. It was the only way to get the roots in, and it needs to go like that for its future growth. Yeah, so, but not now. Obviously, I need new roots to be actively growing before I dare move that. Otherwise, you know, it's already had enough of a troubled life. I don't want to add to it. That's those two. Now, this is another no ID Cattleya. This is quite a nice looking plant, but I'm a trifle worried about this one. A lot of the older roots failed when it was potted up in the holy clay pot. That's almost to be expected. The latest new growth is not quite as large as the previous one. It's not far off, but it's not as plump. Same height, and it's got a good leaf on it. The sheath has gone brown. That doesn't mean to say it's not going to flower, but it's just starting to produce a new root system under this latest growth. And it is pushing some roots out farther back, which is a little bonus, and some of the older ones are branching as well. But a lot of the roots that came out onto the pot have failed miserably. So there's a little bit of worry on my part here. But a lot of the older roots near the base of the plant are now branching and producing live roots. So maybe it was just a bit too much of a shock for it when it was sorted out and put in this pot. But if it's going to bloom, it'll be on this growth. If not, you might have to wait for the next one. But I mean, it's not a bad looking plant, that one. It's just a no ID hybrid, has lovely orange flowers on it. So but you know, it's growing on, as they say. This is my Iwanagara apple blossom, now called something totally different that I can't be bothered with. Now this will only ever produce one growth at a time for me. It's a flipping nuisance. Maybe next time we'll get two, because what I'm really after on this is multiple leads to get a more sensible blooming on it. Nonetheless, this year's growth is nice and strong, nice and plump, bigger than the previous one. It has a sheath. This one sometimes pushes the bud straight out of the apex and doesn't bother with the sheath, and other times it does. It didn't put a sheath out on the last one. The spike came straight out of the top, but this time we've got a sheath. So I'm waiting on this, but I really would like this one to branch. And there's no sign of it doing it yet, but then it's not producing its latest growth yet. It'll need to bloom first. It's produced some reasonable roots this year, along with that new growth. But again, this was another one, when it was potted in the holy clay pot, most of the old roots failed. So it's in a stage of recovery at the root sort of part of the plant. But nonetheless, it's happy enough to have produced the largest bulb ever this year. And the leaves are nice, and it does have a sheath. So hopefully that'll be blooming down the line a bit. And just hope next time that this growth splits into two. That would be good. Or push out somewhere farther back on the plant. I don't mind which, just, it'd be nice to have more than one growth on that. I've had this one a while now. And each new bulb has bloomed. It's quite a successful bloomer, but just the one at a time at the moment. This is my Brassocattleya Maikai. You can see the Brassavola in this. It's it just looks like one, and doesn't look quite so much like a Cattleya. This has pushed out some new growths this year, and it's still doing it. So it's picking up. I must admit, it's picking up a little slower than I expected, because these are pretty vigorous plants. But nonetheless, we've got some new growths, and we've got some root activity that's visible at the top of the plant. And there are old roots branching above ground, so that may well be going on down in the pot. But until they get long enough to actually push out the holes, it's difficult to tell without taking out the pot. But nonetheless, new growths and some root activity going on. So it's picking up gradually. I don't know whether there's any sign of any buds yet. I mean, this growth's got a sheath on it. That may or may not bloom. It might miss out this time round. It's normally a winter bloomer, and it may not this time. It just depends. There are some... Oh, actually, that's a spike, not a sheath. So we have got one spike that I can see. I'm just having a scan round, because I don't look at this that closely very often. There's old sheaths from older growths. They're unlikely to bloom. So far, just the one. And that may be all it does this year. Have to wait and see. I mean, I'll be pleased if I get any blooms on it. What about you down in there? That's a possibility down in that one as well. So we may get some blooms. But what I would expect is for the new growths it's done this year to push on. And it's still producing new growths. It's probably going to produce an awful lot more next year when it gets a better root system established. and next winter should be its big deal. That should be when it decides to give a good show. It's a nice mature plant, and it's growing on nicely. I've got no complaints. I must admit it's just a little slower than I expected, and I think once the latest set of roots get going a bit better, it's going to start growing like a weed, but it's not quite there yet. Hopefully soon. These three small Cattleyas all came out of the big box, and I think some of them were actually out of their pots when they came out of the big box as well. I naturally assumed they were all seedlings, but Beatrix did tell me that one of them was actually supposedly blooming size. Well, proof of the pudding. So in theory these two are seedlings. This one has pushed out a new growth, and it has produced a good root system. It's nicely attached, and I'm not going to attempt to say what it is. I'll put a pop-up because it's just one of those names that I can't read the tag, basically. That's what it comes down to. This one has again grown a good root system on it, produced a nice new growth, and in fact I think it's produced two, and it's in the process of pushing up a third new growth up the top there. So this one's coming on, it's growing nicely. This one is Cattleya Mariechen crossed with Cattleya duvenii, so it's a hybrid crossed with a species. That'll be interesting when that blooms, and it could be a long way off blooming yet, I don't know. It may be heading towards blooming size, and it's not a seedling, but it's difficult to tell without sort of looking it up, which I haven't done yet. But I'm pleased it's attached, it's got good roots, and it's looking okay. This one is obviously blooming size because it's bloomed. A single bloom, and that could be a trait of this particular orchid. That's Cattleya Little Lemon Drops crossed with Encyclia vitellina. So if either of those, well, the Little Lemon Drops is a hybrid, but if Encyclia vitellina has a trait of single blooms, then that may have passed its trait on. It could just be that it's a first-time bloomer, so it's only produced one bloom. Nonetheless, it's produced a couple of new growths, one of which has bloomed. So I'm pleased with those three. They're all coming on nicely. They're all nice root systems, nicely attached, and they can certainly stay on these mounts for some time at that size plant. There's no need to even think about moving those. It is worth bearing in mind that seedlings, orchid seedlings, are a bit fragile. You know, they've come out of a flask in a sterile environment, out into the big bad world with all the pathogens and things that can go wrong. Oh, fans just come on. And they've managed to get a hold in their little pots, and they're starting to grow on, but they haven't got a lot of strength in them. Even a repot can set them back enough to die. So the idea with seedlings is to get them set up in a place that they can stay for as long as possible, and let them get a good bit of growth on them and a reasonable root system before there's any effort made to actually disturb them in any shape or form. That way you get a reasonably strong plant before that point comes where you've got to do something with it and pot it on or do whatever. But yeah, they can be pretty fragile in their younger stages, so don't chop and change them around too much because they haven't got the strength to take it. Now this is, well, it was Sophronitis newer, it's now Cattleya. Most of the Sophronitis has been reclassified, so you can almost take it as red. There's no S in the Cattleya world anymore, so any of your SLCs or your SCs or your pure Sophronitis, they've been done as Cattleyas now, so change all your tags again. This one's been Mr. Sulky for a while. It did do quite a nice mass blooming last year, and then it sat there and did nothing for quite a long time. Well, it's started to grow again now. I mean, starting at the left, you can see nice new growth there, then a second one coming up in the middle there, one up the top, another one in the middle there, and a couple coming out this end. So it's now bursting back into life. And at some point down the line, all of those new growths will probably bloom. So that should be quite nice. But it's growing well. It's got a good set of roots on it. And as I said, I think it was just having a rest after that, you know, sort of massive blooming. I mean, some Cattleya types do that. Some of them actually need it. Certainly some of the species, if they don't get a sort of almost dormancy after blooming, then the growths don't seem to be as strong. So maybe this is one of those, and now that it's a mature plant, it's showing those traits, whereas it didn't in its earlier years. But it's grown well, it's got some nice leaves. Very prone to leaf spotting, this one, so if you own this one, what I do after I've watered it is I use the Rogers patented huff and puff method, which is just give it a quick blast of air from your mouth on the leaves that have got water on them and get those spots off. I mean, there's a leaf with water damage on it that I missed. But most of the others are nice and clean, but it is prone to leaf spotting if the water stays on it. So always keep the leaves dry on this one. Just water them out, get in under there, and then huff and puff any water spots off, leaving the leaves dry before I put it back again. Now, this is a very recent acquisition, Brassavola Little Stars. I keep being told by many people that it grows like a weed. Well, it isn't yet, and I've got a horrible feeling that this only new growth at the moment has got a kink in it. So I think it may have been damaged in transport, and as a consequence it may well fail. I'm waiting for signs of new root growth, but it's got to get itself established. I mean, it's got a new home basically, and a new environment as well as something else. There were some signs of some spikes on some of these growths. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, that one there looks like that might be a spike right at the base there. Possibly. It may not develop as a consequence of its major disturbance. There's signs of old spikes on quite a few of the growths here. I think that's the only spike that looks like it might be live. This one could be, although the tip looks like it might have gone brown, so maybe not. But anyway, this is a new acquisition. I was hoping that new growth wouldn't fail, simply because that's the point that the new roots will come out. But it's got several growing points on it, so there's no reason why the next set of new growths shouldn't actually produce some nice new roots. It has got a root system that's capable of hydrating it. But you know, there was some damaged roots, there were some quite nice roots around the back of the plant that are currently against the mount, but they haven't shown signs of spreading out and attaching yet. But then I haven't had it long, you know, to give it a chance already. But it's a nice plant, and if it does catch a hold and get going, then apparently it grows like a weed. We will wait and see. Yeah. So that's that one, and that's it with the Cattleyas. So that's it for today. I think I've covered them all. I don't think I've missed anything. I don't normally miss those because of where they are. So you know, and as I've had to get them all down to water them, we should be okay. So as I said, probably no video tomorrow because I'm out all day. But I'll be collecting clips to put together and produce a video later, probably early next week by the time those are ready to go. And we'll see where we go from there. Thanks for dropping by. See you next time.